Hi, Mitchell. Welcome to the show.
John, it's good to be here.
Oh,
I
it's
appreciate you having me.
nice to have you. I was reading about you just prior to this session here. There's a lot of books there. Says 27, and the pre-chat you told me that you even wrote 65. Well, I don't know where to start, and I'm going to let you lead the way. So why don't you first tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you exactly, and how did you get to write so many books?
So let's see, I'm a husband of 34 years, a father of a 25-year-old, very proud of. I've been in Silicon Valley for 35 years. I've started 20-ish companies. Um, Four of those companies are book publishing companies. So we've actually published 750 books, which made it a little bit easier to write 65. Um, and who am I? Uh, you know, a lot of who I am and how I act today is a result of what happened when I went to my undergraduate. And my undergraduate degree is in, I like saying it because as long as I could say the words, that means I'm doing okay. My undergraduate was in stochastic and deterministic models of operational research, which kind of means, if I'm putting it in English, I was taught how to model people and systems and improve them. And it turns out that the tools and the techniques and the things I've done all stem from what I learned in my undergrad. And not a lot of people could say that. So I'm very proud to be able to say that. But that also led to when I was focused on the book publishing, the goal was to come up with books that were easier to write.
Hmm.
And as a result of coming up with a framework or a formula, I'd always have to test it myself, potentially more than once. And so there are a number of the books that are there just were part of the process of what I wanted to offer other people, and I needed to test drive it myself.
Hmm. I noticed that there's quite a variety of different subjects you entertain, but they're all basically nonfiction, right?
So for me, as a publisher and mostly as an author, my goal when you have an asset called a book is to be able to use the asset to help drive money somewhere else. Because most books, particularly today, in today's world where books are democratized, the money you're going to make is most of the time not on the book sales. Now we've had a dozen plus books sell over $100,000 worth of books, but regardless of that, the concept is if you have a book, it is a credibility piece. As a credibility piece, you're given an opportunity to talk to somebody about the book or at least the subject matter in the book. And if you do that, if the person on the other side is a referral partner or a potential client, you have an incremental amount of credibility because you have a book on the topic that they're interested in getting resolved. So when I talk to authors, it's always about nonfiction books. And for me personally, I believe I'm going through my head of the 65, but I think they all were nonfiction. Yeah.
Yeah, for something as you describe it, it would have to be nonfiction. Once you get into fantasy, science fiction, crime and drama and stuff like that, it wouldn't have the same impact. But I'm looking at something that's in fact right behind you there. Credibility Nation for professionals who want to be seen as credible. It's almost like a really sophisticated business card.
Yes. I mean, it's if you're going to summarize it in words and we could stop right there, the answer is yes. The I'll give you one of the techniques that many authors, including me, have used a lot. So if you're a professional in the field, typically if you have a product or service to sell, or if you're a um, coach or consultant, what happens is you have a specialty. We're just going to clump it under this thought. If you're working with other humans, you
Mhm.
have a transformation specialty. You
Yeah.
could bring another human from A to B, just to try to simplify it, right? So,
Mhm.
so if you could do that, how do you get clients? Well, one of the things that you can do is write a book. As a matter of fact, if you wrote a book that completely gave away all of your secrets, that doesn't necessarily mean that, my guess, 90% of the people who read the book can apply it. Now, 10% who read your book when you give away all your secrets will take it and do it themselves. And that's okay, because they wouldn't be good clients anyhow. So for the 90% who are interested in what you're talking about and you give it away, they're going to then want to hire you. So the best technique for picking up new clients, and also for getting, if you want, if your book is the type of book that would be used in universities, the best technique is, and doesn't matter in today's world if it's self-published or you go through a publisher, is as you're getting close to the publication date, well, first of all, you should always be building your mailing list. You know that. And you're, whether or not you're using YouTube or you're using any one of the email services, always build your mailing list and get people who are interested in it. There's a lot of techniques for marketing, but the best technique is right before you're going to publish, print, whether it's 50 or 100, or I had an author print 300 copies of her book.
Mm-hmm.
She autographed the copies. She had FedEx and mailing envelopes, USPS, United States Postal Service, be a different postal service in Canada, right? So the envelopes were already addressed and pre-stamped. There was a handwritten note on the inside. The books were signed, and she dropped the books to 300 prospects. These were both academics who were teaching these subjects in school. This was also people in places where she could be speaking. And before she did that technique, she had a coaching business that was about 40% capacity used. That means she had not 60% left over, but maybe another 20 to 30% of capacity available. And when I said to her, hey, listen, when this book drops and you do your thing, you're going to hire a bunch of people. And she goes, no, Mitchell, I like working for me. I only want me. And so I'm just going to be more selective of who my clients are. Well, this was about 14 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And she's been at in between 60 to 80% capacity ever since. And her book sells well because academics are using it in the classroom.
Okay.
And so that's a consistent, quarterly or by semester purchases.
Sure.
And what she did is, and so if you have a book that you particularly like and you know who you're sending the book to, and you happen to know that a specific chapter is relevant to somebody or a specific graph is relevant to somebody, not only do you autograph it, not only do you have a personal note, but you put a little sticky pad inside the book to that chapter. Read this chapter or look at this graph.
Okay.
Then the follow-up is to have a conversation. So
Yep.
do a phone call afterwards and say, hey, did you get the book? What do you think? What's next?
Yeah.
And that is the best of every technique you could use. Your book in the hand of your prospect or referral partner is the best technique you could use.
Sure. Writers are, regardless of the style that they're writing or the genre, do consider their demographic. And so if you're writing a fantasy with dragons and witches and that sort of stuff, you have in mind what kind of person would want to read that. That would be it'd be far more difficult to figure out where to send those kind of books. Whereas I looked on the list for you, and that's very business oriented. How can you translate everything you just said to people who write science fiction or, fiction in general? Like, what should they do?
So the best thing you could do, I believe, is take a look at going to the field and research whether or not you're using AI. So use Gemini, Bard's solution, but find reviewers who review books in your space. Find academics who are actually using, who do review of the type of fiction you write in their classrooms and come up with a list of 50 to 100. Now, the downside is particularly good reviewers are getting a ton of books, right? So how do you actually stand out? And so you want to think about what you can do differently that's going to stand out. And one of the most simplest things you could do to stand out is write a one-page abstract. I mean, because most of the time, I've had people say, "Hey, Mitchell, I'm gonna send you my book," and they sent, and we had a good relationship and a good conversation. They send me their book, and it's not autographed, and there's no summary. It's just a book in a package. And what do I do with that? Right? Because as a busy person, do I sit down and read an entire book? And typically not. So find the reviewers, find the academics who talk about it in classroom, is would be the translation to what I said.
Hmm. Okay. Perhaps not everything is academic. I'm just, I'm not trying to be oppositional, but if you are writing a book with dragons and witches in it, I don't see the academic nature of it. Can you
Oh,
explain what
well,
you mean by
I
that?
would assume, and I've not done research in this, so if I'm wrong, that's okay. I would assume there are some classrooms, some professors who actually do reviews of fiction in their classrooms.
Huh, okay.
And so if that's the case, then you want to be on the friendly list of people who are doing that so that they recommend if they're going to recommend, 5 or 10 books to read in a semester, that you're on that list.
Hmm.
And so, oh, by the way, part of that could be when you send your note, you could say, by the way, after you review the book, I'm happy to do a Zoom call with you. Right. And that might make you special.
Yeah, yeah, of course, sure. Yeah. I do have a variety of different guests on the show, and I'm thinking about the Christian ones who write something about the Holy Spirit and what that's, done in their life and God this or raising children in a godly manner. I think I tell them that you probably have a baked-in audience. Do they know about this in your church? Have you contacted other churches? Certainly in your country and in my country as well. There's lots of churches and a lot of ministries that may be interested. And then they have Christian bookstores on top of that. So there's your baked-in audience. Is that what? Yeah, that would work.
There's in no matter what vertical you're in, there's an audience today that have LinkedIn groups, Facebook groups, Instagram, TikTok. There's probably physical magazines, online magazines. The so the first thing you want to do, depending on the genre you chose, it should be a genre you're excited about.
Of course.
If not, why do it in the first place? Okay. So if it's a genre you chose and you like, find like-minded people. And
Yeah.
when you run across somebody who is potentially a like-minded author, they are not a competitor, they're a peer. And then you ask the peer, hey, what did you do? Where did you go that was exciting or interesting?
Okay.
Where did you, right? And there's so many interesting opportunities in that way.
Yeah. I've actually done that with one other author who intrigued me so much and writes similar to me. And then I interviewed him. He's part of the show. He's got an episode on here. And then I asked if I could have a Zoom meeting with him, not recorded, just talk. I just wanted to pick his brain a little more, and he was more than happy to do that.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Um, Now, I also want to mention that I had a guest on here who, when I first heard about it, I thought, well, how interesting can this possibly be? He wrote a book about how to buy a recreational vehicle. That's it. He's written one book and he's very successful. And that has got to be one of my favorite interviews. He made how to buy a recreational vehicle very exciting.
Oh,
And
fun.
yeah,
Do you remember one, two, or three things he said? You don't need to say them, but do you remember off the top of your head?
I do, and of course, I've never thought of buying a recreational vehicle, but it almost makes me want to go out and buy one. Of course, I'm not going to, but he got me so enthused. He was so positive and everything. So that was part of his thing too. He was a very
You
positive man.
you
Yeah,
you got it. So what's interesting, and coming back to the reason I wrote the book Credibility Nation, um, the one of the characteristics of humans. So humans, by the way, have a frequency. Humans resonate at a certain frequency, and the emotion of that most attract other people. And this is according to, there's a index called the Spain, SPANE index. And it's, if you start researching that, you'll see papers and research on that in the National Institute of Health in the United States and other places. And what they talk about is there's a way you could look at positive and negative emotions of a human. And the emotion or feeling that attracts the most amount of vibrational energy from the person you're talking with. Like most people think, oh, that must be love. If somebody's emanating love, that's the one that's gonna come across the most. I see the peace sign in the back, so that's why I was drawn to say that. It turns out the emotion that truly attracts the most people in terms of influencing other people from a frequency perspective is authenticity. So if it turned out that author wrote a book on buying recreational vehicles and loved buying recreational vehicles and loved being part of that, you're feeling that emotion.
Yeah.
And then he simplified it so that you could understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things, if this was of interest, so at the time, this was 2019. The Credibility Nation book came out in 2020. So it is time for an update. Okay. Because I was thinking as a book publisher that books have been too democratized. It's too easy to publish. By the way, it is extremely easy to publish, whether you want to do an ebook or a physical book. It's very simple. So now what you want to do is, if you just want to do it and get out of the way, that's an easy thing. If you want to do it and spend some time on it, then just make sure it's the right book you want to do. So for me, I'm thinking, okay, what's next? And so I ended up doing a Napoleon Hill journey. Napoleon Hill interviewed 500 millionaires and came up with a book, Think and Grow Rich. So I decided to interview 500 thought leaders on the concept of credibility. So I did that between 2019 and 2020. And so I ended up coming up with 10 values of credibility. And so that's what the book itself talks about, the 10 values, and talks about how do you simplify it. And what I'll say is the definition of credibility in the dictionary needs to be updated. And I also did a TEDx. The TEDx was in 2021, it was the 28th most popular. And it's called We Are Losing Our Humanity. And I'm tired of watching it happen.
Yeah.
And so the thing that's interesting whenever I speak about this, it's a different tone of voice, it's a different feeling, it's a different emotion is emulated, because if we want to do nothing more than be more humane to each other, we just need to be more credible to each other. So can I tell you the updated definition of the word credibility?
Yes, please do.
So if you look in the dictionary, by the way, the dictionary still is not accurate. The dictionary says credibility is the quality in which you're trusted. I believe that definition was true prior to the internet. What's happened with the fact that we now have the internet, we now have cameras, we now have the ability, everyone who wants a camera and a microphone and share who they are can do that. What that means is that we get to know people a lot better. We get to decide if we like them or not. So the updated definition of credibility in today's world, it's the quality in which you're trusted, known, and liked. And by being known, it's not that I know of you, it's that I actually know you. Who are you? How do you show up in the world? What is your level of ability to want to do the right things by other? And so it's interesting when you think about where we are in the world. If you think about how you're putting yourself out there, whether you're a fiction or nonfiction author, do people get to see you? It's very rare these days that you're going to get a following without people actually seeing you as well.
I wonder what Marshall McLuhan would have to say about all this.
Yeah. What would you think?
Well, he almost talked about it in Understanding Media, and you can read into it what he projected for the future, and it sounds similar to what this is. But what you've just said is really interesting. In the editing, I'm gonna pay attention to that last bit of information you gave because that's interesting. That's really mind provoking.
Well, John, it's what's really hard if we're thinking now about extroverts and introverts,
Hmm.
right? The the extrovert's going to go out there and sometimes they're going to overshare, right? But what are they talking about? Right? Now the introvert is going to want to hide and not go out there. So the thing that's interesting is what we don't think about the differences between extroverts and introverts is the extrovert wants to share in the world and have the biggest audience possible.
Okay.
In our pre-conversation, you said you want to get your YouTube following to over 1 million.
Well, and all all I said is, please subscribe. I don't think we're ever going to get 1 million followers unless I start putting videos of fat men jumping on trampolines. That should increase
Yeah,
my
but if that's not you, by
no.
the way, that's definitely not me, and I will unsubscribe if you do that, because I subscribe. The what's interesting as a introvert is you can end up creating an environment, you can end up creating a group that are people like you,
Yes.
right? And part of being successful in today's world is being a community superhero. Oh, so by the way, let me step back for a second. So this book, Credibility Nation, was the end result of me sort of being academic and interviewing 500 thought leaders on credibility. I've now deployed it since I published it in 2020, and I am in absolute desperate need to do an update because I've learned, it's one thing to do the research and then to here's the research, and it's not a bad book, but it's my thought processes of who I was at that time. And I unraveled a ton of secrets. And I now have deployed a number of those secrets. And and I could tell you a fun thing I did this weekend.
Okay.
I I flew, I'm in Northern California, so I flew to Southern California. I was a judge on it's a nonprofit organization that had 300 students who were being entrepreneurs and writing. So they spent time doing business plans and they were pitching their plans. So I ended up judging 8 of the 64 groups, and I did the luncheon keynote. And so what's interesting, I'm used to talking to business people, and adults. So now I needed to talk to middle schoolers and high schoolers. So I really needed to simplify, and that's the thing of when you really know your audience, you've actually created content that can appeal to an adult but also a middle schooler and a high schooler, and I got great feedback, and I'm really glad I did this because it really forced me to, for instance, I what I'm focused on now is clarity, because clarity needs to come first before credibility. Who are you? And
Yeah.
can you describe yourself in less than 10 words? And so I made the entire presentation, I practiced it, and the first person who reviewed it came back and said, Mitchell, I kind of think you need to have a definition of the word clarity in your presentation. And I'm like, that's really obvious. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I missed it, right? And so I am, however, having spent time on it, thinking about it, practicing, and now having delivered, I feel that I've really clarified my messages, and it's been fun this week. My conversations have changed as real. So the short answer is I should is never necessarily a good word, but what I should do is put on the calendar the time and attention to get that book updated, the next rev. And so I will say, let's see, since we're on the air, I will publicly say I will definitely I'm also getting a PhD. And so, John, it's kind of, I can't publish that before the PhD,
No.
which means, yeah, that's interesting. So I don't know when my next book will come out, because I can't officially publish things which will be incorporated into PhD, because it
course,
has to come
I
out in the
understand that, sure.
dissertation first.
Based on everything you've said so far about at least your books, they would have to be fairly short.
That's the interesting part. So the concept of a book doesn't have to be the quote unquote great American novel,
Right.
right? There are times and places where you absolutely need regimented detail. My dissertation committee chair is telling me that the dissertation is going to be way many words than probably the combination of the number of words I've written in my entire life, right? It's going to be huge, right?
Yes.
That said, if I was going to write a book on how to buy a recreational vehicle, I'd want to have good pictures. I'd want to have smaller print, bigger letters, right? So a lot of the books that I write, so as a publisher, I ended up with a number of different book series. So I'll give you an example. When I first started publishing, I'm like, well, listen, you don't need a 50,000 word book. You could have a book with 20,000 words. We could even make 15,000 words look. So that was my first iteration. The second iteration is a book series called 42 Rules. And I said, listen, if you're a blogger and you've written 42 blog posts that are 500 words or so, you have a book.
Right.
So 42 Rules is 42 500-word blog posts. Right. So I got a bunch of books in that series. The last iteration, I think that's the last, and then I did combinations. Right. But the last iteration was my Think Aha book series. So because Twitter was such a big deal, we ended up creating books which had 140 bite-sized quotes in them. And so what's interesting, it's, so you could say 140 tweets, but you can't just randomly put 140 tweets. You have to put them into chapters.
Yes.
And what would happen is we'd have people write summaries of each chapter. So, the thing that's fascinating is you don't need a lot of words. It completely takes out the fluff. So we would create about 120-page book where, here, I'll give you an example. I'll give two examples. So these are two books we've done for other people. They're both pretty big. This one because it is a hardcover. And when you look on the inside, this is called Stakeholder-Centered Coaching. We call them, instead of tweets, we call them aha messages. They're aha messages, and it's built on a platform. So this is the Think Aha series. We probably have a couple hundred books in this series. It's built on a platform where the person at any one point in time, if you think about everything you say, there's always an aha message in there. So in this case, we specifically focused on the aha message. So we have an image and we have a picture. Now, this is paperback. This author just wanted more content, right? So we do have the aha messages in the back, but we also have a large number of, we have a lot of content, because this particular one is probably more in the realm of, this is Iggy, so invite God in versus edge God out. So this is an author who uses this in his coaching practice. So the thing that's fascinating is, if you don't have a book yet and you're in the services businesses, you need a book.
Right.
But the book doesn't have to be the great American novel. And by the way, here's one of the things I hear, John. Many people say, yeah, I'm going to write that book. It's going to be that big book. I'm going to do it when I have time, when I retire. That non-business or that nonfiction book is no longer relevant when you retire, because you're going to want to use your book to drive more business. If you retire, you're not driving more business. So writing a book because you want to put content out there doesn't have much value.
Mm-hmm.
You want to write a book because in the nonfiction space, because it's going to help you get more business. In the fiction space, you want to write a book because it's an idea in your head and you need to get it out.
Yeah.
And what you want to do in both cases, what you need to be able to do is become a community superhero. You want to collect the community around you that is interested in your topic, that wants to cover and talk about your topic. And that is the direction that us as humans are going into,
Yeah.
is that no matter who you are, extrovert or introvert, now introvert, make the community smaller and make it just people you like, right? But create that community around you that is interested in you, want to propel you, want to learn from you, you want to learn from them.
Yeah. And they definitely exist. Communities are everywhere. Yeah. Now, I'm noticing that there are introverts who have podcast shows and become guests on podcasts, and you can tell they're introverts, but this new technology has opened up a space for them to be able to express themselves. Yeah.
They're in the comfort of hopefully their home somewhere,
Yeah.
and it's a task that they maybe bullied themselves through the first 1 or 2 times, but then they realize, oh, this is fun.
Hmm. Super. Now there's a book that I just want to ask you about because it just appeals to me. Thank you, saying thank you in 140 languages. That doesn't sound like a business-oriented book. And tell us a little bit about that. I speak Hungarian.
So,
That's my native language. Is that in the book, the Hungarian version?
I knew you asked me in ahead of time and I couldn't find it quick enough to see. My guess is yes. What, but I'm not sure. So let me take a note to
Okay.
send you a PDF copy of the thank you book. The What we ended up doing, is I ended up recognizing that, this is for the Think Aha book series where you had 140 aha messages.
Right.
Is if we take a phrase that many people use. So, Marshall Goldsmith, the number one CEO coach in the world, um, his his phrase at the end of every email, at the end of most every talk, is "Life is good."
Hmm.
So I created a "Life is good" in 140 languages book.
Great.
I did the same with "Thank you," because it was. And then I had a platform for a while. We were recently hacked, and that platform I have not been able to get that
Hmm.
back yet. Um, but we having an opportunity to sometimes say thank you in other languages, knowing that your native is Hungarian, sending you a thank you in Hungarian, is something that I would do, if that platform was up and running. So I'll send you a PDF
Okay.
copy of
All
that
right.
book. Yeah.
You mentioned someone's last words were, that, but just as something they say in my podcast, I don't know if people watch it to the very end. My last words are always, "And be kind to one another." And I remember
Mm.
the very first recording I did, it just came out of my mouth, and I said, well, "Where does that come from?" And I've been using it ever since. And I think it's because I look around the world like you do, like all of us do, and we can use that message. I think if we were just kinder to each other, perhaps things would get better.
Oh, I
Eternal
am.
optimist, that's what I am.
Yes. Well, I'm gonna the TED talk I did, which was "We're losing our humanity and I'm tired of watching it happen," is all about that. So why don't we put that in the show notes, and I'll send you the link now.
Excellent. Well, usually I ask the author to give the best possible pitch they have to sell their books. But in your case, I'm not sure that that's exactly it. I'll just ask you any final words before we say goodbye.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I mean, I could always pitch a book or my author's books. That's I don't want to publish anyone, including myself, unless I'm proud.
Of course.
That said, we have one life to live. And in that one life, you want to be of service to others, because that's part of being humane, is being of service to others, and you want to have fun. So what could you be doing where you're of service, you have fun, and people pay you? And what I would say is the thing that we've been taught one lesson. I mean, we've been taught many lessons, but let me tell you one lesson we've been taught, which was wrong. And I want to give you the lesson that we should be being taught. We've been taught that if we are a service provider, we need to produce as wide of a net as possible. Because the bigger the net, the more people, the more fish we'll catch, or the more clients we'll get. And what I'd like to encourage you to think through is having clarity. The more clear you can be on who you are and how you serve. And basically, for me, it's who do you serve and what do they perceive as their pain point or pleasure point. The more clear you can be, the easier it is for other people to recommend you. And so I'm going to ask you to focus on clarity. I'm going to ask you to focus on that playground you play in, and then building a community around that playground. You can always go to my website, mitchelllevy.com, and learn more about what I'm talking about there. We have a number of different products. Some of them are free, some of them have low price. And then, and of course, we all have people in my space, we all have a bigger ticket offer. And the thing is, though, I believe if you can actually say, I wake up every morning and I play in this playground, if you could just say those words and they mean it and you get paid to play in your playground, then I'll echo Marshall Goldsmith. Not only and be kind to others, but life is good.
Well said. Totally agree with you. And in our time spent here, I have learned quite a few things. I'm going to really focus when I edit this segment on what more I can gain from this. I'm really glad to have you on as a guest. You've been very,
Thank you.
very
Thank
enlightening.
you. I'm honored with your words. Thank you so
All
much.
right. Well, thank you very much. So if anytime you want to get back on the show, next season, I'll be recording in the fall of 2024, and I have no plans to stop this show. If anytime you want to get back on and talk some more, I welcome you. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then please consider hitting that like button and leaving a comment. You can also subscribe and ring that bell because I release 2 episodes per week, one on Wednesdays and one on Saturdays. And if you are an author, I would love to hear from you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.